and welcome to The Gas, or perhaps we should call it The Break this week because we have breaking news. I'm Gary Gastelou, and this is the official podcast of American Cars and Racing. Well, the NASCAR antitrust lawsuit trial was expected to take 2 weeks. And it has, but that's because it has ended early with a settlement. NASCAR 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports announcing on Thursday that they'd reached an agreement that satisfied everyone. Financial terms are being kept confidential, but the big news is that NASCAR has agreed to make the 36 charters held by the teams permanent. Evergreen is how it put it. This was a key point in the trial and something even the teams that signed the most recent agreement had been lobbying hard for. For those not familiar with them, the charters are similar to sports franchises. They guarantee entries at every race and a share of NASCAR's revenue. It's not clear what pushed the two sides to come to a deal at this point in the trial, after the plaintiffs had rested their case and a lot of dirty laundry had already been hung out for everyone to see, including previously private financial information from the teams and many comments made by NASCAR officials about their concerns about competition and not wanting to make the charters permanent. 2311 Racing owner Michael Jordan said outside the courtroom afterwards that level heads prevailed.
When you get to the finish line, sometimes you have to think, not just for yourself, but you got to think about the sport as a whole. And I think both parties got to that point, and we realized that we could have an opportunity to settle this, and we dove in and we actually did it. Unfortunately, it took us that long, but we got here.
All of the details that will affect the other charter teams have yet to be officially released, but according to the Associated Press, they'll now be able to share in the international revenue. That wasn't the case before. They'll also get a third of the revenue from IP, and while the charters are permanent, they will be renegotiating terms of the revenue share with each media rights deal. Now, probably be a few days before this all shakes out, so we'll be getting into it in more detail on the next show, so check back for that. But for now, this is the Gary and Alex show. So let me bring in my co-host, Alex Nunez, who looks like he just left the barber. I wish we had video because he is freshly shorn. That is a tight cut, sir.
I am freshly shorn like a sheep, you know, in from the field.
I don't know about you. I don't have nearly as much hair as I used to. But I was thinking about this when it comes to age. You and I are both old enough to remember in person America's bicentennial in 1976, aren't we?
I remember it very well. I went to the sort of the parade of tall ships when they came through New York Harbor. My parents had a friend who had an office down in Lower Manhattan, so we went and had one of those like really good views of as all those things went by. And even the printed photos in the photo album somewhere in my parents' house.
Seems like a long time ago. Also seems just like yesterday. One thing I didn't remember, though, and I'm not sure you did, was that in 1974, 2 years before the bicentennial, Chevrolet introduced a line of Spirit of America models, special edition models of the Impala, Nova, and the Vega to celebrate the bicentennial. Not sure why they felt like they needed 2 years lead time on that, but they have become kind of collectibles. One of them was just on Bring a Trailer. One of the Impalas sold for $16,000. And now next year, of course, 2026 is the sesquicentennial, which I think is going to be the word of the year next year because nobody's ever heard that word before the
Yeah.
250th anniversary of America. And to celebrate that, Chevrolet has just revealed a new line of special edition cars. This time it's called the Stars and Steel Collection. And it's actually the Corvette, the Colorado, and the Silverado, light duty, heavy duty, and EV. They've got flag motif decals, red brake calipers. They're actually not very red, white, and blue. There's not much blue in these cars. I'm a little disappointed in that. But they do celebrate the 250th anniversary, and every purchase of these cars is going to send $250 in donations to veteran charities. Do you think these sorts of things are a good marketing hook? It seems real cheap and easy for me, and you got to jump on this bandwagon, don't you?
It's low hanging fruit. You do have to jump on the bandwagon. The thing is, when you do it, you do have to market it. I'll be interested to see, if there's any push, behind these beyond this initial sort of news release and the earned media pickup. But listen, who doesn't love a good tape stripe package? That stuff only gets cooler as it ages.
I saw an old car the other day with nice classic pinstriping, not even that old of a car. I think it was from the 80s. And it's funny how that's gone away. These are a little more bolder, the graphics you get on this.
Yeah,
But they are going to be limiting the Corvettes to 250 units, and you can get it on any Corvette, but the other ones are all open. You can order as many of these Chevrolet Colorados and Silverados as you like to. Jeep also is getting into this game. They're an official sponsor of the America 250 organization. They're going to be supplying cars to that and helping promote that. That's the group that's actually organizing all of the national events next year. And at some point, it is going to be releasing some special edition models, although we haven't seen them yet. Not exactly sure when they're coming out. One thing missing from this anniversary that we had back in 1976 was a company called American Motors, Alex, which of course went out of business in 1987 when it was purchased by Chrysler for, I think, $1.5 billion dollars. Can you imagine buying anything today for $1.5 billion dollars?
not something that big, that's for sure.
But for those of you nostalgic for the American Motors days, there is now a six-part documentary series that you can watch on PBS or YouTube called The Last Independent Automaker, which chronicles the rise and fall of American Motors. And joining us now to talk about it is the producer of this series and longtime automotive journalist, also probably America's biggest AMC fanatic. He's certainly king of the AMC fanatics now, Joe Ligo. Thanks for joining us, Joe.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gary. And I have to be careful. There's a lot of AMC enthusiasts bigger than me out there. You should see some of the collections these guys have. I only own one. Uh, if you're not at least in the teens or 20s, I don't think you can be considered the biggest AMC enthusiast. They people tend to collect these cars, and once you get one, you can't stop. But I'm very grateful to be part of the community. The AMC world is a great place to be, and it's just been awesome to see the response to the last independent automaker. People were really excited to see this story told.
Are you a longtime AMC fan or something recent and then that sparked you to make this documentary series?
I guess you could say long time. Yeah, I mean, it's probably been about half my life. I got into cars right around the time I was getting my driver's license, and there was just something about AMC, the underdog story appealed to me, right? It's things that aren't here anymore. The company was long gone by the time I got my driver's license, but there was something about the story of AMC, the fact that they weren't around anymore. I wanted to figure it out. What happened to them? And so I've spent a good part of my life figuring out what happened to AMC and putting it into this series.
And let me ask you, as far as the what happened part, I don't want you to give away the whole series. Obviously, people want to watch this thing. But when it comes down to that moment in 1987 when Chrysler wrote the check and bought the company, was there a moment where it finally went wrong for AMC? Was there a left turn they could have made instead of a right and stayed an independent automaker? Or were there just so many wrong turns that there was no way to change things at that point?
I actually wrote an article for the Autopian because that's a really good question. I mean, and AMC guys still argue about this today, but I wrote an article that was about, different forks in the road. Multiple periods where major decisions were made in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, where, you had lots of little decisions, but some really key big decisions that kind of set them down a path of no return. And the film talks about these some, but in the 60s, George Romney leaving the company to go into politics, certainly the world would have been different if he'd stayed in the automotive business. In the 70s, investing tons of money in the design that would become the AMC Pacer, and then having that not pan out, getting to the point where they invested so much that the car would have had to sell so many copies that it fiscally wouldn't have made sense. I mean, they needed the Pacer to be a vehicle that sold, 300,000 cars a year. And, I think AMC's total sales were like 400,000 cars a year. And so it just wasn't going to happen. And then even in the 80s, yeah, I mean, I think one of their biggest mistakes, and it's something you're seeing automakers wrestle with now, is AMC, when they merged with Renault in the late 70s, invested a lot of money into building a new subcompact because that was the hottest segment in the market, except subcompacts aren't very profitable. And so by the mid 80s, when gas prices went down and inflation went down, everybody started buying big cars, and here was AMC left holding the bag after investing 200 million to build a subcompact in America. And that's the thing we're seeing automakers struggle with right now. I mean, literally in the news, the president's talking about we want to have small cars back in America, and the automakers have all abandoned small cars because they're not profitable. And so it's the same industry, the same problems, just a different decade, you know?
And it did have Jeep. That was the golden apple, the thing that Chrysler wanted to get its hands
Yes.
on. It was cool back then. It did well, but certainly wasn't the big mega brand it is today. Uh,
Yeah.
was the market just not ready yet, or did AMC just not know how to play Jeep at that point?
That was it. Well, I think we have to figure AMC was figuring it out as they went, as were all the automakers, that they were consistently being surprised that SUVs and trucks saw increased volume every year from basically the 70s onward. And so I think AMC made the mistake a lot of automakers made during that time, which was underestimating demand for SUVs. And so, I mean, you had every year Jeep was, the Toledo plant that built 90% of the Jeeps was at capacity every year, extra shifts, extra hours, whatever. And so I think every year AMC was like, wow, we keep selling more and more and more and more Jeeps. But then, as we talk about in the documentary, in 1979, the second energy crisis hits, and Jeep sales fall by half. I mean, they went. I mean, like you can imagine the fiscal brutality of that happening to any company if they had a brand fall by half in under 12 months. And I mean, that's really what kind of put AMC on the ropes. And eventually, Jeep sales rebounded in the 80s, but yeah, it wasn't until Chrysler came along and bought American Motors. AMC did great with Jeep, but Chrysler understood how to turn Jeep into just a massive cash generator. And it still is. Yeah, I don't think AMC necessarily did anything wrong with Jeep. I just think that, like a lot of automakers in the 70s, they could not predict how big SUVs would become. And so I think they were always a good place to be, which was running the factory at maximum capacity. But yeah, the SUV thing, that's a tricky one. Jeep was definitely a big reason why Iacocca wanted to buy American Motors. I mean, some internal analysis at Chrysler said that for Chrysler to develop its own SUV line in the 1980s would have cost at least $1 billion. And for 1.5 billion, Iacocca got the best known SUV brand in the world, which included, 4 or 5 models. So I mean, and he got all of American Motors on top of that, which included some other pretty good assets as far as a brand new factory in Canada and the brand new design of several other vehicles and stuff. So yeah, I mean, he made out like a bandit.
You mentioned George Romney. He was the one that really pushed AMC toward the small cars in the 50s and 60s. He, of course, is the father of Mitt Romney, who you feature in the show. You actually got him to talk to you about this. This is one of my favorite parts of the series. And I think what's great about it is even though he was just a kid at the time, he seems to remember what was going on well. And he has a lot of interesting things to say about those years when his dad was running AMC.
Yeah, Mitt was great. I think, first off, he and his staff were incredibly gracious and accommodating. It was kind of a bizarre request. It's like, hey, can we come interview you about your dad's time in the auto industry? And at the time, he was still a senator. We went down to DC to interview him. But yes, his staff was incredibly gracious. Mitt was super polite and great to talk to. And it was really nice to talk to him about something other than politics. I think it was kind of nice for him to get a break from politics and just kind of reminisce about his dad. And yeah, he was a great interview. And yeah, we really talk about in episode 1 how George Romney really Volkswagen gets a lot of credit for popularizing small cars in America, and they deserve it. But even before Volkswagen was selling six-figure sales, American Motors was selling six figures worth of Ramblers in the United States. And so I think VW and American Motors should get shared credit for popularizing compact cars in America. And if you zoom out, I think the two big innovations AMC did in the times when the company was most successful was in the 1950s when they pioneered small cars, and then in the 1970s when they pioneered four-wheel drive vehicles through Jeep. And I think the two times AMC did the best is when they were in market niches that the rest of the big three hadn't found yet. And so if you look, I mean, our automotive world today is still influenced by American Motors. I mean, two entire categories of vehicle in the United States, compact cars and SUVs, are thanks to, in large part, the work of American Motors.
Jeep, interestingly enough, has been using the American Motors logo on some new merchandise. Not with the name AMC, but the triangle, rectangle thing. Is that a name, that logo? Is that known as anything?
Some people call it the A mark. There's
Right.
some corporate reports, some stockholder reports around the turn of I think it was like into 69 into 70 that AMC came out with that logo. And so people tend to refer to it as the A mark logo.
You'd mentioned you're a younger fan of AMC. Do you find there are many people born after 1987 who are into the brand and might connect with that? Or is that really more a nostalgia hit for people who were into AMC back in the 70s and 80s?
Certainly the club, the American Motors Owners Association, I think, the major, well, maybe not the majority, but certainly the largest percentage, the biggest group within that club is people who are into 70s cars. Baby boomers that have Javelins, AMXs, and Gremlins. Those are kind of the hot ones to have. But I think that there's a lot of people my age who maybe weren't around when AMC was in business, but they grew up in a world where AMCs were still showing up on used car lots. They were, cheap cars that you could buy. And I don't know, I think there's a cool factor. It's the fact that they're not around anymore. And I think, the rise of Radwood and other types of automotive culture that celebrates things beyond muscle cars have made it so that AMCs kind of have a place in the conversation because they're cool, right? I mean, people like Eagles, Spirits are interesting, Gremlins are cool. And so I think you do see people who were born after 1987 who are into American Motors. It's not a huge group, but I think the internet makes it easy for these fandoms to connect and to grow.
Alex, you more of a Javelin AMX guy, a Gremlin Pacer guy, or a AMC Jeep guy?
Oh God, I would love to have a javelin. It would be so much fun to have a javelin. But I love the styling of the Gremlin. I mean, it's so much fun when you see like a Gremlin anywhere because like many of these cars that were from the 70s, most of them are just dust now. So if you see a Gremlin or a Pacer in any form, in any state of just basic assembly, it's like seeing an ancient civilization, almost. But when you see a nice one, it's like it really is a testament to like the person who either restored it or like somehow managed to keep it, that way. You're more likely to see like a Rebel machine or a Javelin or an AMX, in really good shape, just because those are the more collectible cars. But like when you were just saying, like if you see an Eagle or a Gremlin or a Spirit or something like that that's in good shape, those draw crowds like at your local like cruise night thing. In some ways, it's like it's more exotic than like a LaFerrari, in real world terms, out there at the local cruising.
Yeah, definitely. And you're totally right, Alex, that I've talked to guys in the club. They say, I took my Gremlin to the cruise in and I parked it next to a Corvette, and the guy got mad at me because people would come over to look at my Gremlin and not notice his Corvette. And I think part of it, there's a couple factors talking to the collector community. Part of it is that AMCs were, for a long time on the collector market, a lot cheaper. I mean, a Javelin was a lot cheaper than a Mustang or a Camaro. I mean, that started to change. Prices have gone up, but they were more affordable as collector vehicles. And I think that was one thing that drove interest in the brand was that like, and then I think also people, there's Camaros and Mustangs everywhere and they're great cars, but I think people want to be different. And so Javelins, AMXs are cool. And then even, Gremlins, I think Gremlins are easy to make go fast. And I think people like that. It's easy to drop a V8 in, it's easy to, hot rod them and make them fast. So I think there's an appeal there. And as far as the 80s cars, the Spirit and the Concorde and the Eagle, aside from the Eagle's four-wheel drive, which was very state of the art, the rest of the vehicle and the powertrain are very dated, but in a way that turned out to be a blessing because they outlasted a lot of other 80s cars. A Spirit, a Concorde, an Eagle is a lot more durable than, a Chevy Citation or something like that. And so, while Ford may have sold way more Tauruses in the 80s, I think a lot more of the Eagles have survived because they were just a lot more durable. Taurus was a car you drove 150,000 miles and scrapped. And an Eagle, it's a car that can stand the test of time a little bit better. And so now in the collector market, those kind of things are pretty cool.
Stellantis still owns all of the IP, these names, and the American Motors brand. Have you heard, or do you think there's anything more they could do with it? Could they bring American Motors back in some way other than merchandise? We've seen the model names pop up again, but do you think they can even go bigger than that, or is that just a pipe dream?
I mean, I think Stellantis has too many brands as it is, and too many brands and too low of volume as it is to introduce a new brand. But I do think there's things they could do to tap into it. I think bringing back the logo on Jeeps and stuff is a cool thing. I think nostalgia is kind of having a moment. People are nostalgic about things from the 80s and stuff. I think certainly if they made a model called the Jeep Eagle that was like a more, kind of four-wheel drive crossover type wagon thing, and I think people would be super excited about that. You saw how popular the Challenger all-wheel drive Challenger was. I think there's still a place for all-wheel drive cars, especially when they're kind of in the wagony crossover type area. So I do think there are ideas they could pursue. As far as bringing back AMC as a brand, I think that's unlikely. I know, Gary, you and I joke that Stellantis should just rename their corporate brand American Motors because it would
Would love to
be,
see it.
it'd be way more recognizable than Stellantis. Nobody knows what a Stellantis is. Yeah, I think there's certainly some branding things, some model things. I mean, the Dodge Hornet sadly is not nowhere near as cool as an AMC Hornet, but yeah, I think there's some branding things they could do with Jeep. There's some names they could bring back. I mean, I don't really like the Gladiator. I think they should have brought back, the Comanche or like the J series trucks or something. I think that would have been way cooler than the name Gladiator. But yeah, I don't know. There's definitely things out there I think Stellantis could do to lean into that heritage as far as, acknowledging that AMC existed. But the thing is, they don't even acknowledge barely that Chrysler exists. So it's kind of a tricky thing for them. But as an AMC enthusiast, I think that yeah, more recognition for the company is a good thing. We want to see their story get told.
You did mention the small car talk here in the US after President Trump said he'd love to see the Japanese style K cars come to the US. Stellantis' Fiat brand just announcing it's going to be bringing the electric Topolino to the
Oh, that's
US
cool.
probably next year. Unfortunately, this isn't actually a real car or even a K car. In Europe, they're sold as a quadricycle, has a top
Mm.
speed of 28 miles per hour. And when it does go on sale in the US, it'll probably be one of those neighborhood electric vehicles. But here's something interesting I found. The original Jeep CJ 2A, back when it was Willys, before AMC owned that, it was 130 inches long and 59 inches wide and had a 60 horsepower engine. The K car regulations in Japan, maximum 134 inches long, 58 inches wide, 58.3 to be precise, and 63 horsepower maximum power. Jeep can bring back the CJ2A as a K car today, and it would pretty much fit the bill if we get these regulations passed. What do you think about this idea?
It's funny. I have thought for a long time that there needs to be a smaller Jeep, especially because the Wrangler's gotten so big and it's super popular as a big vehicle. But I think there's room for a smaller Wrangler underneath it. And it's funny, AMC toyed with this, and then when Chrysler bought AMC, Chrysler toyed with this. They called it the JJ program. And because, the Wrangler was the YJ, and then they were going to have a JJ, which was the junior Jeep. AMC had concept vehicles and they took it to auto shows and said, "Oh, we're going to build a mini Jeep. We're going to build a mini Jeep, a 30 mile per gallon Jeep." And there was always some reason why it didn't work out. And the AMC's case, it was they didn't have the capital to tool for a new body and a new vehicle and a new chassis. But then in Chrysler's case, what I had always heard was that they were really serious about putting the JJ into production, but then so many executives saying, well, it has to have this and it has to have that. And, oh, we can't just have a soft top. You got to have a hard top. And they added so many features to it that financially it wouldn't have made sense. It would have competed with the Wrangler too much. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, if we make it cheap enough to make it different from the Wrangler, nobody will buy it. And if we make it nice enough, then people will just buy a Wrangler. I think it would be really cool to have maybe not a K car Jeep that's that small, but I think certainly a junior Wrangler, that's just a four-cylinder and, a four-seater, two-door type Wrangler. I think, oh man, I think they would sell a ton of them.
I was talking to Mike Manley, the former head of Jeep, a decade ago about the baby Jeep. They were thinking about it then, but just can't kind of pull the trigger on it.
I have one more story. We talked about the Spirit of 76 cars. This it's surprising to me that AMC never made a Spirit of 76 vehicle. I mean, of all the companies who could have made a Spirit of 76 thing, they never did. They used it in some of their promotion and some of their, dealer advertising. They had some signage and stuff. The only like Spirit of 76 product I can find that they built was there was a State Farm insurance agency in Kenosha, Wisconsin that special ordered like a dozen Pacers that had, I think it was they were white with a red stripe and a blue vinyl top. And so it was like a special package you couldn't normally
Amazing.
get. Yeah, you couldn't normally get from the factory.
Stand
That
up and
you
salute that.
Right, they wouldn't let you combine those colors, I think, normally. So, but you could order it was like white. I think it's white with a two-tone red and white with a blue top, and one of them still exists. And is it makes its appearances at the Kenosha Homecoming Car Show every 3 years. And it's pretty cool. It has the original State Farm logo painted on the side, and it's trimmed out in pretty nice condition. So that's a cool thing to see. AMC never made an official, Spirit of 76 product, but I guess there's probably other insurance agencies or other fleet sales that year that they maybe offered that as like an off the books option. So that's a pretty cool thing to have seen that at least. It's the closest you get.
Joe Ligo, the last independent automaker on PBS and YouTube. Thanks again for joining us today.
Absolutely. It was a blast.
Alex, November car sales just came out, but there was something you won't find on those lists. Turns out the Chevrolet Camaro is outselling the Ford Mustang, even though it's been out of production for 2 years.
And how is that?
Not on the street, but in NASCAR, where surprisingly, two teams are switching from Ford to Camaro next year. The Haas factory team and Rick Ware Racing. Camaro, they've got the new redesigned Camaro coming out, even though there is no new production
Yep.
Camaro. And I guess it either looks really good or Chevrolet's writing them a little check under the table. I'm not sure, but they're stealing sales. I'm joking about sales, but we're talking 7, 14 cars, race cars, and then they're going to be racing them on the track. And then they're going to be winning races. And then people are going to be going to Chevy dealers instead of Ford dealers, but they're going to be buying trucks instead of Camaros because there is no Camaro to buy at the Chevy deal.
I'm begging Chevy to just come back with another Camaro as quickly as possible. I'm on record. That's the best looking of the three Cup car bodies.
Definitely.
Please, Chevy, do right by people. Find a way. Let's have another Camaro as soon as possible.
Would love to see one before next NASCAR season, but that's not going to happen. Maybe 2027 when the new Cadillac CT5 comes out. They might throw Chevy a new sports car then. In any event, thanks again to Joe Ligo for joining us today. Good to see you, Alex. Keep the hair as short as you can, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks, Gary.
The Gas is a production of A Car Media and American Cars and Racing.com.